Welcome back to the class to yet another discussion on Max Weber, the central figure in classical sociological theory. So in the previous class we had a discussion about Weberian notion of social action and rationalization and how he proposes an ideal typical categories of social action into four broad categories, sorry. And we also discussed this larger argument that when a society becomes modern, there is a gradual shift in these types of actions or these larger orientations of actions from emotional to traditional to value oriented towards this instrumental rational action, and that is his central thesis. And in today's class we are extending, or we are understanding Weber's argument, or we are trying to examine his argument about rationalization and authority. So I also mentioned in the previous classes that this preoccupation with the question of rationalization is a central theme for Weber. It's a central preoccupation for Weberian sociology. So he uses the similar framework trying to understand how a host of modern social institutions and social processes are increasingly getting rationalized. So we already discussed his analysis of social action, and today we are going to discuss his analysis on authority, and coming classes we will discuss his argument about how this economic activity, especially capitalism, is also undergoing this process of rationalization in the modern Europe. So let us begin the session. So for Weber, power was a major category. Power was a central concern for Weber, especially as a stabilizing force in the form of authority and domination. Now, this is an extremely important term for students of sociology, especially those who study political sociology, always try to understand how that various forms of power are exerted in a society and how they manifest, what are the consequences of such manifestations. And we know that power is a central concern for Karl Marx, and he argues that most of the political power derives from the economic power. So that is why he argued that political power as an independent sphere does not have much of a meaning, because this political power is mostly derived from the propertied class or from the bourgeoisie class. And we also discussed Durkheim in the previous sessions, and one of the main criticisms against Emil Durkheim is that he has not paid adequate attention to the play of power in a society. So this preoccupation with power is something very important for every sociologist or every political scientist, because in every society you will find the manifestation of this power in its political form. The simple question, how is that a particular society is governed? How is that rules and regulations are imposed in a particular society? How is that every member of the society is forced to accept certain way of living? How is authority is established? How that everybody is trained or coerced or cajoled or encouraged to respect and support the person or the group of people who enjoy the power relation. Okay, so this power was a central concern for Weber, especially as a stabilizing force in the form of authority and domination. So Weber was extremely sensitive to this whole question of authority and domination, especially, and we will come to its very specific connection between power and authority just down the line. So these concerns about how the different societies have different forms of domination and different forms of authority, and how do these different and distinct forms provide a kind of a stabilizing force for every society, all these things were the major concerns of Max Weber. Now, we usually generally understand power as the ability to influence others' action in spite of their resistance, and this is a very usual sociological definition. Power is understood as you exert the power over somebody. Power is exerted from A to B, so power is seen as something that is being exerted over somebody. This is a more traditional Weberian understanding of power, where you exert the force, either direct force physical force or even the threat of force. Okay, if you have a gun with you, you don't need to really shoot. The very fact that you have a gun with you would be sufficient for the other person to comply with your directions. So it's an ability to influence others' action in spite of their resistance. So what do they think, whether they agree with that or not, hardly matters, because you are either not sensitive to that or you are not concerned about it, because you have enough wherewithal to influence their action. And this is a very usual argument. And by the way, let me also point out that this conventional understanding of power has been thoroughly revised of late, especially with the arguments of Michel Foucault, where he thoroughly, radically redefined power. In Foucauldian discourses, power is not seen as something originating from A and then exerting over B. Rather, power is understood as more fluid. Power is something that is existing everywhere. Power in the form of knowledge, power in the form of science, power in the form of institutions, and a host of other. It's a very fascinating set of arguments, which I'm not going into that. So for Weber, the real important question was, how does power able to justify itself or seem to be approved by those who are subjected to power relation? In other words, how is power legitimized? And this is an extremely important point, because we know that in many societies, or in every society, even those who are at the receiving end of a very unequal power relation, okay, those who are at the receiving end of a very brutal system, extremely exploitative and oppressive system, many times they may not even revolt, they may not even resent. Okay, they tend to accept that. They tend to accept that, and in many places we know that this situation is brought in, or this situation is realized not through very brutal force, okay, but the people who are at the receiving end of the power, they also think that, okay, it's our fate, or that is the natural situation. The people who are oppressing us, the people who are above us, they have every right to govern us. And this was a major concern for Weber. How do people get to believe that? What are the mechanisms through which substantial section of people, for example, you know, there are women who think that husbands have the right to beat them up. Okay, because getting beaten up is not a very nice experience for anybody. Nobody enjoys it. Okay, maybe except a very few section of people. But otherwise, ordinary human beings do not enjoy being beaten up or being harassed or intimidated or other things. But there could be substantial number of women who think that their husbands have the right to beat them up. Now, how do we understand that? Okay, so Weber's central concern is that how does power able to justify itself? What are the mechanisms through which power justifies itself, seen to be approved by those who are subjected to power relation? So it's easier for us to understand that those who exert power, they will always try to justify their position. Nobody would like to give away power that easily. But more interestingly, as I told you, many times the people who are at the receiving end of the power relation, they also seems to be accepting that fact that, okay, the other group has the right to dominate us. And this is a very intriguing situation. In other words, how is power legitimized? Legitimacy, if you check up dictionary, you will see that legitimacy is a process where acceptance is garnered, acceptance is secured. Okay, so that is why we define, or Weber defines, power, authority as a legitimate form of power. Okay, authority as the legitimate form of power. The power that is being exerted is considered to be legitimate. And is legitimate and legal one and the same? Are they one and the same? No, they are not, because you can have other forms of legitimacy. You can have forms of legitimacy other than the legal. That is what Weber is trying to, or Weber is explaining in this particular session. Of course, legality is an important source of legitimacy, but there are extra legal forms of authority which are equally legitimate. Okay, so this legitimate form of power is authority. So Weber's concern, or Weber's preoccupation was trying to understand how that there are different forms of power exist in every society, and there seems to be different forms of agreement. There are different sources of agreement. There are different mechanisms of agreement so that everybody, including the people who exert power and the people who suffer or people who are subjected to power, seem to be in agreement that this form of power relation is accepted, it is good. They may not say it is good, but it is accepted, it is legitimate. So legitimate authority obtains when the power to command is deemed valid, that is when persons subjected to authority voluntarily offer their obedience. So exactly the same point that I mentioned so far. When the people at the receiving end, when they voluntarily offer their obedience, when they see that the kind of restrictions which are placed on them are fine, they are correct. They may not say it's good, but they say that they are fine, they are correct. And how this correctness is derived, how is this legitimacy derived, is the kind of a question that Weber asked repeatedly. So he talks about three types of authority, three types of legitimate authority. One is the legitimacy of a traditional authority derives from the sanctity of custom. The legitimacy of a charismatic authority rests on the extraordinary qualities of the leader. And the legitimacy of rational legal authority follows from the observance of formally established rules and procedures. And this is a very fascinating type of fascinating discussion. So Weber is talking about three important types of, or three important sources of legitimacy, three important types of legitimate authority. So one is the traditional authority derives from the sanctity of custom. So this, again, we discussed this the importance of tradition when we discussed his arguments about action. Because certain actions have been in practice for a long time, they attain certain kind of sanctity. When certain practices become a custom, it's very difficult to change that. And quite often people react violently when you try to change their customs all on a sudden. And every society, if you look into how legal interventions were made, for example, how a host of customs in India, including say child marriage or sati or other similar kind of various practices of untouchability, how when the authorities, especially colonial regime, when they tried to prohibit these customs one by one, they had to really face very fierce kind of opposition, because these customs were considered to be very, very important. They were considered to be extremely divine. They're considered to be things which cannot be changed. A lot of sanctity was attached to these customs. So that is why it's very difficult for the secular state to intervene and to change the religious customs, because people tend to attach so much of meaning, so much of importance to these customs, and they sincerely believe that that is how these things were practiced for a long time, since a time immemorial. And the second one is the kind of a charismatic authority rests on the extraordinary qualities of the leader. This we will come back later. And third one is the legitimacy of the rational legal authority follows from the observance of formally established rules and procedures. And all the rules and laws that we are subjected to today. For example, if you want to drive a car, a vehicle in India, okay, you need to pass through various legally established procedures. You must be above a certain age, you must have a valid driving license, and you must have learned license from a approved driving school, okay, and you must possess certain amount of knowledge as well as skills about driving. So for everything, each and everything, there are set of formally established rules and procedures. And these rules and procedures are extremely important. That is why Weber called them as rational legal authority. Now, let us take them one by one. Traditional authority. Traditional authority is a form of power exercised by the patriarch, the lord, the prince, or the king. This type of authority is grounded in the venerability of the eternal yesterday, the sanctity of everyday routines, the sacred quality of age-old rules and powers, the validity of that which has always been. These are his own words, so that's why I have put them in a double inverted comma. So tradition authority is a form of power exercised by the patriarch, the head of the family, mostly a male, yeah, and or the lord or the prince or the king, because these are the important manifestations of tradition. And this type of authority is grounded in the venerability of the eternal yesterday. Okay, so this yesterday, the past, is supposedly extremely important because you are seen as a continuation of the past, and the past is to be venerated, it needs to be worshipped, because among many religious traditions, the past really represents the best of the times. The past really represents the ideal time, and most often they look at the contemporary times as a stage of deterioration. So they would argue that we have lost our faith, we are not being true to our religion, we have lost our morals, that is why we are really suffering. Whereas we had a golden past, we had a golden yesterday. So this idea of this eternal yesterday, and you know that these are extremely ahistorical claims. The people who talk in language, they are not academics, they are not intellectuals, they are ordinary people who have a kind of very mythological understanding of their past. Okay, they may not know the kind of very specific trajectory of their community, historical trajectory of their community, but they have an important construction of an eternal yesterday, the sanctity of everyday routine. And another thing, because certain things are done every day, we are habituated to that, and once they are habituated, it's very difficult to change. The sacred quality of age-old rules and powers, the argument that just because certain things have been following for a long time, okay, they continue to be important. We don't really ask them what is the relevance of continuing to do that, what is the relevance of continuing to do that. We don't really ask those questions, because certain practices, you can look into your own family. As soon as a child is born, okay, what is being done, or when somebody dies, what is being done, or during the time of marriage, what is being done. Okay, so in each and every aspect of our personal life or social life, things are done, or how a festival is conducted in the church or in the temple or in the mosque near to your place, and how do they constantly hark back on tradition, the validity of which always has been. So they too are bounded by tradition. They risk their legitimacy and may even provoke a traditionalist revolt if their commands fail to respect the time-honored ways of the past. So who are these they? They are the people who all hold the traditional authority. So these traditionalist leaders, they are also bound by tradition. They only are the carriers of the tradition. These leaders are only the carriers of the tradition. They can't simply break the tradition, because their entire source of their legitimacy lies on the fact that they simply represent the tradition. Okay? They risk their legitimacy and may even provoke a traditionalist revolt. If, for example, a sannyasi guru, an ascetic, the head of a mutt, for example, you have different important mutts in India. Shankaracharya has established several mutts, and you have different kind of mutts. And every time a head of the mutt is anointed, and he would be constantly watched by the devotees. Or for take the example of Pope, the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope is an extremely important position, and the actions of the Pope would be constantly monitored by the believers across the world, because he is supposed to uphold the tradition of the church. So if a Pope wants to modernize something like what is being currently done, okay, he has to be extremely careful that he has to be seen as continuing with the tradition while also undertaking efforts of modernization. And if their commands fail to respect the time-honored ways of the past. Okay, so a traditional leader is supposed to be the custodian of the tradition, and the moment he is seen as breaking away or moving away from the tradition, he could face a revolt. So those in a subordinate position occupy the status of subjects. In such a situation, the people who are below are always the subjects. You have the king and the subject, you have the priest and the believer, okay, you have the feudal lord and the subjects. So subjects are always governed. They don't have rights. They are always at the they are always the recipients of the magnanimity of the Lord. Their language is not the language of right. Okay, they can't ask anything back. Traditional authority, Weber says that predisposed towards keeping things the way they are, traditional authority is an inherently conservative force rooted in and reinforcing traditional attitudes. And this is something extremely important, especially when we try to understand social change and tradition. Tradition seems to be extremely resistant to change. It's very difficult to people to change their ways, especially their social habits, the social customs, their deep-rooted beliefs in certain things. So they are traditional authorities inherently conservative force, rooted in and reinforcing traditional attitudes. It also is irrational, meaning in this context not governed by established rules, fixed procedures or legal precedents. Okay, because many of these things could be seen as irrational, though this tradition has its own logic. For example, even sati, for that matter, sati has a logic in itself, isn't it? If you think that, if a society thinks that the wife needs to immolate herself when her husband dies, it has a rationality. Okay? Whether you agree with that rationality or not is a different question, but that act has a rationality. That the wife is committing suicide not simply for the sake of something else, but it has very specific purposes. Okay? And that whole community who encourage her to do that, they share that. But here Weber is not talking about such kind of rationality, but Weber is talking about the modern understanding of rationality. They are not governed by established rules or fixed procedures or legal precedents. Within the limits set by sacred traditions, leaders are free to command according to their own personal inclinations, introducing an element of arbitrariness and unpredictability into the exercise of power. So, every traditionalist power center has some flexibility. Every such leader can bring in certain elements, but this freedom is something very limited, unlike the charismatic leader whom we are going to discuss down the line. Second important type of authority that Weber talks about is charismatic authority. Okay? Charismatic authority, a term Weber uses once again in purely value-free sense. Okay? So he is not saying whether charismatic authority is good or bad, whether some leaders, some charismatic leaders are, whether they should be accepted, they should not be accepted, they should be celebrated. He is purely not getting into the realm of judgment. He is not getting into the normative realm. He is only very clinically, very scientifically analyzing this type of authority. So it derives from the extraordinary qualities of the exceptional individual, and these two terms are extremely important. A charismatic leader will be an exceptional individual, and this exceptional individual will have extraordinary qualities. Okay? So who could be the examples? One of the widely cited examples. Okay, you can have both good as well as bad charismatic leaders. Okay, of almost all important religious figures, all the prophets are supposedly having charismatic authority powers. Jesus Christ is supposedly having charismatic authority, and the best example could be Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was an exceptional individual. You know that looking at the way he dresses, his behavior, his character, his very obstinate position with certain values, the way he ruled over the entire freedom movement. He was an exceptional individual with certain extraordinary qualities. So these extraordinary qualities are the ones which actually provided people like Gandhi or people like a host of others the kind of charismatic authority. You have quite a lot of religious leaders are seen as charismatic authorities. The people who claim to be divine, people who are who say that they are incarnations of the God. So they are all seen as exceptional individuals. Okay? The authority of charismatic leaders, their ability to inspire people to abandon their normal lives and take up a historic course, rests entirely on their own personal gifts or deeds, the force of their example, the potency of their message, and the righteousness of their mission. So these charismatic authorities or charismatic leaders have the unique ability to inspire people. They can inspire people to join them by abandoning everything that is seemed to be a kind of a normal life. They can, and because they have the force of their example, because they are the living embodiment of these values, okay, and the potency of their message. And another example is always cited as a negative example is that of Adolf Hitler. Hitler had that charismatic, he had that charisma. He was a charismatic leader. You know that he was not very tall or well built. He was a very short person. But his speeches were extraordinary. They were electrifying. If you have seen the way Hitler gives speeches to the people, the people would be enthralled. People would be enchanted by his speech. Very extremely powerful speech. Extremely powerful speech. So he was able to derive so much of confidence and trust and faith from the ordinary people because of their example, the potency of their message. The message of Mahatma Gandhi, for example, or the message of Adolf Hitler, for example, they were extremely powerful, though they could be qualitatively diametrically opposite. Hitler wanted the supremacy of Aryan race. He wanted to be the Führer of the world, whereas Gandhiji wanted independence. He wanted a peaceful life for his fellow citizenship and the righteousness of their mission. And a charismatic leader would be unequivocal in terms of the righteousness of his mission. He would be absolutely clear, absolutely certain that what he or she is doing is the right, is correct. And that confidence provides him enormous energy to go ahead with that. And the validity of charismatic authority is contingent on leaders' continued success in demonstrating their heroism, proving themselves through victories and obtaining benefit for their followers. And we know that this charismatic authority also comes with its own risks. A charismatic authority is not something that is granted to you permanently. A leader has to really prove time and again to be worthy of the followers' support. So they have to be continuously successful in demonstrating their heroism and proving. They need to really re-energize people constantly, continuously, and proving themselves to be through victories and obtaining benefits for their followers. And so in terms of charismatic authority, it is the leader, the charismatic leader is the leader, and the people who follow are the disciples or the followers. So they are not subjects because they are not ruled over in the sense of a traditional authority, but they are the disciples. Okay? The disciples who always look forward to the message or the followers. It is not only foreign to all rules, but because it is inherently unstructured and short-lived, antagonistic to normal routine, charismatic authority is also the direct antithesis of all everyday forms of domination, whether traditional or rational legal. So, one of the central themes of charismatic authority is that it is exceptional. You don't get charismatic leaders quite often. Charisma is a very rare quality. Okay, it happens only once in a while. So, it is foreign to all rules. Charismatic authority by definition is established by breaking all the rules. You can't have a charismatic leader by following the same old tradition. Charisma is generated only when something exceptional is established. So, but because it is inherently unstructured and short-lived, it's something like a glimpse that comes in the historical canvas and then suddenly goes out. And short-lived, antagonistic to normal routine, charismatic authority is also the direct antithesis of almost everything that is established. Almost everyday forms of domination, whether traditional or legal, rational. While traditional authority is a conservative force rooted in the past and committed to the ways things are, charismatic authority is a revolutionary force. So charismatic authority wants large-scale changes. They are not happy with the way things have been. Okay? They want revolutions. They want complete changes. They want complete reordering of the existing systems. and it is intrinsically unstable and transitory. Okay, so they are short-lived. You can't have a charismatic authority or charismatic leader for centuries. It's impossible. Charismatic leaders come, they completely disrupt the society, and then mostly what happens, it becomes routinized and it becomes institutionalized. And once things become institutionalized, they will begin to establish the all set rules and procedures, institutions, everything. It goes back to more traditional or rational legal kind of authority. So qualitatively, you can have both consequences with a charismatic leader. You can have a charismatic leader who can be Martin Luther King, for example. He was an extremely charismatic leader. Okay, he could really inspire millions of blacks as well as whites. Nelson Mandela, for example. Okay, they were all extremely charismatic. Mahatma Gandhi, we mentioned about that. Okay, but Adolf Hitler also is an example of charismatic leader. Who could give an extremely dangerous vision about humanity. Okay, who always romanticized an idea of a world ruled or dominated by these Aryans, and a world where less creatures have no place, or people who are considered to be lower are eliminated completely. Extremely dangerous worldview. And the third one, the most important one, according to Weber again, is the rational legal authority. Rational legal authority, typically associated with the bureaucratic organization, is specifically modern form of legitimate domination. This type of authority rests on legality or a system of consciously made rational rules, the rule of law rather than the person. So the best example or a series of examples, a set of examples are the way in which we live as a modern democratic state. As I gave you examples, each and every act of our lives are decided, regulated by laws. For example, if you need to buy a house, if you need to get married, if you need to dispose the dead body of a person, okay, or if you need to organize a program, if you need to start a company, each and every of these acts is governed by a set rules. And who makes these rules? In a democracy, we are the people who make the rules. We do it indirectly because the people whom we elect as our representatives, they do this work in the parliament. And once a bill is introduced, it is discussed and it is approved, it becomes a law. Once it is notified, it becomes a law, and we are supposed to rule by that. So this law is not the brainchild of a single individual. It is not on the basis of the whims and the fancies of the person. So that is why every representative, every ruler, administrator of a democratic society or a modern nation is bound by the laws. They can't violate. Okay? So the obedience is owed to the legally established impersonal order. Okay? You can't change, a prime minister cannot change the rules arbitrarily, because there is a watchdog, there is a judicial system that is overseeing the maintenance of the law. And if a law is violated, the Supreme Court can overrule that particular decision. It can even say that what was done was injustice. It was against the law, which might cost the government its position. So not to the individual lord or master. Persons in command, either elected or appointed, are the servants of the state. They occupy the status of superiors. Those in a subordinate position occupy the status of citizens or members. This is another important set of difference. Okay, so the people, for example, if somebody is prime minister, if somebody is a prime minister today, tomorrow somebody else will come. Yesterday it was somebody else. Okay, so they come into occupy because there is a legally constitutionally established position, and they are either elected or appointed. They are servants of the state, and they occupy the status of the superior, and those in the subordinate position are the citizens or the members. And citizen is an extremely important term, because a citizen is bestowed with rights. So that is why we have so much of discussions and debates about citizenship bill, because the moment you lose your citizenship, you lose a host of rights. You lose a right to to property, to political right, a host of rights are taken away the moment you lose the citizenship status of a particular country. So, along with the rules of law, the presence of bureaucratic administration is the primary source of the distinct rationality characteristic of legal authority. And we know that you can't have a modern system of governance without that of bureaucratic administration. It is a bureaucracy that helps in establishing these rules and in ensuring that these rules are followed thoroughly, they are not violated. So without a we will discuss that later. The three types of legitimate authority, Weber insists, cannot be placed into a simple evolutionary line. This is extremely important. Okay, just like what he discussed about social action, here also we can't say that they are on a evolutionary mode. Earlier it was charismatic, then it was traditional, then it was modern legal rational. He is not arguing that way. Extremely important point. They cannot be placed into a simple evolutionary line, nor this typology meant to be the foundation of any philosophy of history. And here you must compare his argument, his reminder, his emphatic argument that he is not presenting a philosophy of history. And if you remember, for example, Comte, who argued that there is a transition from traditional, from theological to metaphysical to positive. And here also we can see that it also almost fits into that kind of an argument well. But Weber is extremely careful. Weber says that this is not the case. He is not presenting it as a case of evolution. Rather, he is arguing that even in the modern society, you will find a remnants of charismatic or traditional authority. Okay? Or even in earlier times, you will find more. May not be the legal rational one to this extent, but you will have something similar to that. Okay? So just as traditional societies is the preeminent form of domination throughout most pre-modern history, so too is rational legal authority a uniquely modern phenomenon. Thus, alongside the rationalization of actions discussed above, we also observe the modern Western world a corresponding rationalization of legitimate authority. So he would argue that in the modern contemporary society, Western society, the most prominent, the most important type of authority in existence is the modern legal rational authority. It doesn't mean that Western societies do not have any charismatic leaders. It doesn't mean that they have completely become modern by abandoning everything that was traditional. No, that's not the argument. Okay? But the argument is that the modern Western world is corresponding rationalization or the legitimate authority is the modern legal and rational authority. So it is, as I told you, it's not a he's not presenting a philosophy of history. He's not presenting it as a continuum, as an evolutionary model. Rather, he simply argues that in the modern world, modern society, it is a legal rational authority that is important. So it signifies, Weber argues, it signifies a transition from the allegiance to the sacred traditions to allegiance to abstract norms, from the rule of persons to the rule of laws, and from the power relations of a more personal nature to power relations of a more impersonal nature. This is exactly what he says. When societies become modern, especially the case of Western Europe, these are the kind of transitions happening from allegiance to sacred traditions to allegiance to abstract norms. As you know that this legal rational authority systems have very little to do with religion. They don't invoke God. They don't come into existence because it's not been willed by the God. They don't use such kind of language, but they are based on certain abstract principles, say principles of human rights or liberty or equality, like that. From a personal rule of persons to rule of law, from that of a power relation to a more personal nature to power relations of an impersonal nature. Unlike traditional and rational legal authority, charismatic authority is not specific to any particular social context. It has emerged in all places and historical epochs. Weber admits, however, that the rational legal order characteristic of modern society is less conducive to an eruption of charisma than in the traditional social order. Extremely important point. Weber argues that in a modern society, you will see less and less of charismatic leaders. Why is that? What could be the reason for that argument? He would say that a traditional society was more conducive for the emergence of charismatic leaders compared to that of a modern society. In a modern society, of course, charismatic leaders emerge, but it is not that easy. Can you think of the reasons why it would be easier for it would be difficult for charismatic leaders to emerge in modern society? Just think about it. And hence, the modern society is increasingly characterized by legal rational authority. So this is his final point, something similar to what we discussed in the previous class about social action. So in order to just to summarize, to wrap up, Weber is talking about authority because he was preoccupied, he was concerned with the question of legitimate forms of authority and domination in a society. How is that? Even the subject of the power, the best example, you know that when you sit in a classroom and if you do something in the class and the teacher asks you to go out, you walk out of the class. Okay, you go out of the class, you understand it as a punishment because you think that the teacher has the ability, or he has not the ability, he has the legitimate authority to ask you to go out. Or when you drive a bike without a helmet, when the police stop you and then ask you to pay fine, you do so because you think that there is a law in practice, in existence, and you are supposed to follow that. That is the notion of legitimacy. So Weber looks at three ideal typical characteristics of authority and then argues that while even in the modern societies all the three forms of authorities do exist, but the rational legal authority is the most dominant one in a modern society, and the charismatic authority is less likely to emerge and then become prolific in comparison with that of a traditional society. Okay, so we will wind up the class today. It's time, and we'll meet for the next class. Thank you.